Miss Marple cracks the Hollowbrook Mill mystery asterisk chapter. 1. The summons to Hollowbrook. Late afternoon sun bathed St. Mary Mead in a golden haze, its rays filtering through the lace curtains of Miss Jane Marple's cozy cottage, where the scent of lavender from her garden mingled with the comforting aroma of chamomile tea. Seated in her favorite armchair, her knitting needles clicked rhythmically, crafting a soft wool scarf as she savored the village's quiet hum, the distant chime of the church bell, the chatter of sparrows, the occasional creak of her oak floorboards. It was a moment of serene routine, the kind that invited reflection on the small intrigues of neighbors, until a sharp knock at the door broke her reverie. Cherry, her lively maid, bustled in with a silver tray bearing a letter, her eyes bright with curiosity. "Looks important, Miss Marple," she said, handing over an envelope of thick cream paper, its address penned in a precise, elegant hand. "Not your usual post." Miss Marple set aside her knitting, adjusting her spectacles as she examined the envelope. A faint embossed seal, a mill wheel crossed by a river stirred a flicker of memory, though she couldn't place it. Slitting the paper with her letter opener, she unfolded the letter, its words warm but tinged with unease. "My dearest Jane," it began, "I hope this finds you well in your charming St. Mary Mead. It's been too long since our paths crossed at Cousin Eleanor's wedding, but I followed your remarkable knack for untangling life's knots. I write to invite you to Hollowbrook, where I've settled these past years. A week's visit would delight me, especially as there are strange happenings at Hollowbrook Mill that trouble my peace. Your clear head would be a comfort. Do come if you can spare the time. Yours fondly, Beatrice Langley." Miss Marple's lips pursed, her sharp blue eyes lingering on strange happenings. Beatrice, a distant cousin known for her steady nature, was not prone to exaggeration. The invitation was a summons, cloaked in courtesy, and Miss Marple sensed a mystery stirring. "Cherry," she said, folding the letter neatly, "fetch my gray tweed suitcase, please, and include the green shawl. Hollowbrook may be chilly by the river." Cherry's face lit up, sensing adventure, and Miss Marple smiled, her mind already sifting through memories of Beatrice, a practical woman, widowed young, who had managed her late husband's estate with quiet resolve. The mention of Hollowbrook Mill, a landmark she vaguely recalled from childhood tales, hinted at a deeper story. She thought of a St. Mary Mead letter that had once masked a plea for help, leading to a theft unraveled by her gentle probing. "Human nature," she murmured, her needles resuming briefly, "always whispers before it shouts." 2 days later, Miss Marple alighted from a puffing train at Hollowbrook's quaint station, her hat pinned firmly against a brisk April breeze that carried the earthy tang of the river. The platform was a charming affair, bordered by pots of blooming daffodils and overseen by a station master who tipped his cap with a grin. A hired car, sent by Beatrice, awaited, driven by Mr. Amos Reed, a weathered man with a fondness for local lore. "Hollowbrook's a fine spot, miss," he said as they wound through lanes flanked by willows and grazing sheep. "But that mill folks say it's haunted, what with its creaks and shadows." Miss Marple raised an eyebrow, inviting more, and Amos chuckled. "Old tales, mind you. The miller's curse, they call it. You'll hear plenty at the manor." His words, half joking, planted a seed, and Miss Marple filed them away, recalling a St. Mary Mead ghost story that had masked a very human crime. Hollowbrook unfolded like a watercolor painting, its thatched cottages clustering along a sparkling river, their chimneys puffing lazy smoke. The market square bustled with stalls offering fresh bread, jars of preserves, and bolts of homespun cloth, while children chased hoops across the green. Hollowbrook Mill loomed at the village's edge, a sturdy stone structure with a moss-covered wheel turning slowly in the current, its rhythmic creak a heartbeat for the hamlet. Langley Manor, Beatrice's home, stood nearby, a Jacobean house of warm brick and mullioned windows, its gables soft by climbing ivy. Beatrice greeted Miss Marple at the portico, her silver hair neatly coiled, her tweed dress impeccable. But her embrace was tight, her eyes shadowed with worry. "Jane, you're a blessing," she said, her voice warm but strained. "This house needs your calm." The manor's hall was a study in faded grandeur, with polished oak beams, a sweeping staircase, and portraits of stern Langleys gazing down. Beatrice led Miss Marple to the drawing room, where a fire crackled and a tea tray awaited, laden with scones and clotted cream. She introduced the household, each guest a distinct note in the unfolding mystery. Gerald Langley, Beatrice's nephew, was a solicitor in his 30s, his brooding features and restless hands suggesting burdens beyond his years. Margaret Holly, the governess to Beatrice's young ward, was a sharp-witted woman with keen eyes and a blue silk shawl, her smile polite but guarded. Dr. Simon Fowler, the village physician, was reserved, his spectacles and measured speech hinting at secrets held close. Victor Crane, the mill owner, was jovial, his booming laugh filling the room. Though his eyes flicked nervously to Beatrice, dinner was served in a candlelit dining room, the table gleaming with silver and crystal. The meal roast pheasant, buttered, parsnips, and a delicate trifle was exquisite, yet the conversation faltered. Beatrice tried to steer it toward village life, but talk turned to the mill. Victor spoke of modernizing it, his enthusiasm clashing with Gerald's frown. "The mill's a relic," Gerald said, his voice sharp. "It's time we sold it." Margaret's quick glance at Victor and Dr. Fowler's silence suggested unspoken stakes. Beatrice mentioned a missing will, last seen with Victor, that named Gerald heir to the mill. "It's caused such bother," she said, her laugh forced. Victor waved it off, but his hand lingered on a mill-wheel-shaped cufflink, matching the letter's seal. Miss Marple, sipping her wine, noted the undercurrents, recalling a St. Mary Mead dinner where a lost document had sparked betrayal. As the evening closed, Beatrice retired early, pleading a headache, and the guests dispersed, their footsteps echoing in the manor's halls. Miss Marple lingered in the drawing room, her knitting resumed as she gazed at the fire. The mill's curse, the missing will, Victor's cufflink, Beatrice's unease, they were pieces of a puzzle, familiar yet distinct. She thought of a St. Mary Mead case where a family heirloom had hidden a motive for theft. "Something is amiss," she murmured, her needles pausing. The manor was beautiful, but its air was heavy with secrets, and Miss Marple sensed Hollowbrook's tranquility was about to shatter. She retired to her room, her mind alert, ready to unravel the mystery that awaited. Chapter 2. The body in the mill. The dawn broke over Hollowbrook with a deceptive calm, the river's gentle murmur and the soft cooing of doves masking the horror that awaited. Miss Jane Marple, roused from a light sleep by an urgent knock, found Beatrice Langley at her door, her face ashen, her hands trembling. "Jane, it's dreadful," Beatrice stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "Victor Crane, he's dead. Found in the mill, locked tight, and they're saying it's an accident, but I fear worse." Miss Marple's serene expression belied the quickening of her pulse. She donned her dressing gown, her mind already sifting possibilities as she followed Beatrice through the manor's shadowed halls, the air heavy with the scent of polished wood and impending tragedy. Hollowbrook Mill stood stark against the morning mist, its stone walls damp with dew, the great wheel creaking slowly as the river churned. A small crowd had gathered, servants whispering, villagers peering curiously, and Gerald Langley pacing, his brooding features taut with shock. Inside the grinding room, a cavernous space of exposed beams and dusty gears, Victor Crane lay sprawled beneath a massive oak beam that had fallen from the ceiling. His skull was crushed, blood pooling on the stone floor, his once jovial face frozen in a grimace. The room was locked from the inside, the iron key still in Victor's pocket, and a scrawled note on the grindstone read, "The mill's curse claims its due." The words, inked in a hurried hand, sent a murmur through the onlookers. But Miss Marple's sharp eyes noted the ink's freshness, suggesting it was no ancient curse. Inspector Clara Reed, a brisk woman with a keen mind and a clipboard tucked under her arm, arrived from the nearby town of Ashford, her boots echoing on the mill's floor. She surveyed the scene with narrowed eyes, her auburn hair pinned tightly as she issued orders to a constable. "No one touches anything," she barked, her voice cutting through the whispers. "Time of death, Dr. Fowler." The physician, his spectacles fogged with nerves, knelt briefly, estimating death around midnight based on the body's rigidity. Reed's gaze fell on the note, her lips pursing. "Curse my foot. This beam didn't fall on its own." Miss Marple, introduced by Beatrice as a family friend with a sharp mind, was invited to observe, her reputation preceding her. She stepped forward, her sensible shoes silent, her gaze sweeping the room with the precision of a naturalist. The grinding room was a study in contrasts. Rustic machinery dwarfed by the fallen beam, its splintered ends revealing fresh saw marks, invisible to a casual glance. Victor's watch, stopped at midnight, lay cracked beside him, its hands frozen as if to mark the moment of violence. The key in his pocket was unblemished, suggesting no struggle to lock the door. Miss Marple knelt, her magnifying glass a St. Mary Mead jeweler's gift, revealing a faint smudge of chalk on the grindstone, near the note, as if someone had erased a mark in haste. The windows, high and bolted, showed no signs of tampering, and the mill's only entrance was the locked door, its bolts rusted but intact. "A curious accident," she murmured, her tone neutral but her mind racing, recalling a St. Mary Mead mishap where a staged fall had hidden a murder. "Inspector." Reed began questioning the household, her notebook open as she gathered alibis. Gerald, his hands fidgeting, claimed he'd been in his room, drafting legal papers, and heard nothing. "Victor was stubborn about the mill," he said, his voice tight. "We argued yesterday about selling it, but I'd never—" His words trailed off, and Miss Marple noted his clenched jaw, suggestive of guilt or grief. Margaret Hyatt, the governess, was composed, her blue silk shawl draped elegantly, but her eyes darted to the note. "I retired at 10, reading to young Emily," she said, her voice steady. "The mill's curse is village nonsense." Yet her fingers toyed with a locket, a nervous tick Miss Marple filed away. Dr. Fowler, his demeanor reserved, admitted checking on Victor at 9, finding him anxious but well. "He mentioned the will," Fowler said, adjusting his spectacles. It was troubling him. His reluctance to elaborate piqued Miss Marple's interest, reminiscent of a St. Mary Mead doctor who'd concealed a patient's fears. Beatrice, trembling by the door, confided in Miss Marple as the others dispersed. "Victor had the mill's will, Jane," she whispered. "It named Gerald heir, but he said there were changes. Codicil. It's been missing since last week." Her diary, retrieved from her room, confirmed this, its entries noting Victor's secrecy and Gerald's frustration. Miss Marple's lips pursed, the missing will a motive as old as time, echoing a St. Mary Mead case where a lost document had sparked betrayal. She suggested examining Victor's office, and Beatrice led her to a cluttered room above the grinding floor, its desk strewn with ledgers and a mill wheel-shaped cufflink matching the seal on Beatrice's letter. A locked drawer, forced open by Reed, held only routine papers, but a faint scratch on the lock hinted at tampering. Miss Marple lingered in the grinding room, her handkerchief pressed against the mill's dust as she studied the beam. The saw. Marks, deliberate and fresh, suggested sabotage, and a splinter bore a trace of oil, as if from a tool. The note's theatrical tone, curse claims its due, felt staged, a distraction from a human hand. She thought of a St. Mary Mead barn. Collapse, blamed on age but revealed as arson. Someone wanted Victor dead, she murmured, her eyes scanning the household's faces outside. Gerald's agitation, Margaret's guarded calm, Fowler's reticence, Beatrice's fear, they were threads in a tapestry of deceit, and the mill, with its creaking wheel, seemed to whisper secrets as the village awoke. Gossip spread like wildfire, the curse a convenient tale for curious tongues. Miss Marple joined Reed by the river, where the inspector admitted the locked room baffled her. No footprints, no forced entry, Reed said, her clipboard tapping her palm. And that note melodramatic but fresh. Miss Marple suggested, checking the mill's upper floors for signs of access, her mind on a St. Mary Mead attic where a hidden ladder had solved a theft. Red nodded, warming to her ally, and Miss Marple felt the case's weight settle around her. The mill's curse was a fiction, but the murder was real, its roots in the Langley family's past, and she was determined to unearth them. Chapter 3. Whispers of the Curse. The morning after Victor Crane's death cast a somber veil over Hollowbrook, the village's usual bustle muted by whispers of tragedy and the mill's ancient curse. Miss Jane Marple, dressed in her navy coat and a sensible hat adorned with a single feather, stepped out from Langley Manor to attend a tea at the Hollowbrook Inn, her parasol a pretext for mingling with locals. The river glinted under a pale sun, its ripples echoing the mill's ceaseless creak, a reminder of the locked room murder that had shaken the hamlet. Victor's crushed body, the cryptic note, the mill's curse claims its due, and the missing will were pieces of a puzzle. And Miss Marple intended to gather the village's unfiltered tales, knowing gossip often held truths no formal inquiry could uncover. The Hollowbrook Inn was a timber-bird haven, its low ceilings warmed by a crackling fire, the air rich with the scent of fresh scones and brewing tea. Mrs. Edith Porter, the innkeeper, greeted Miss Marple with a nod, her apron dusted with flour as she set out a tray of pastries. "Terrible about Mr. Crane," she said, her voice low but eager. "Locked in that mill with that awful note folks say the curse took him." Miss Marple settled at a table near the window. Her knitting resumed as a prop for listening, her sharp blue eyes scanning the room. A cluster of villagers, farmers, shopkeepers, and the postmistress. Miss Lucy Grant huddled nearby, their glances darting toward her, the stranger in their midst. She smiled serenely, inviting their curiosity, recalling a St. Mary Mead tea, where whispered tales had led to a thief's unmasking. Edith, bustling over with a teapot, proved a fond of lore. "The mill's curse goes back to 1650, she began, her eyes gleaming. Old Josiah Langley, a miller, cheated his workers, and one cursed him before drowning in the river. They say his ghost haunts the mill, bringing ruin to those who tamper with it." She leaned closer, her voice dropping. Victor wanted to modernize it, new machines, electric lights. Gerald Langley was furious, said it'd ruin Hollowbrook's soul. Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking, noting Gerald's traditionalism as a potential motive. The missing will, Beatrice had said, named Gerald heir, but Victor's plans might have threatened that legacy. She thought of a St. Mary Mead farmer whose resistance to progress had masked greed. And Edith's tale rang a similar bell. Miss Lucy Grant joined the table, her pince-nez glinting as she shared a tidbit. "Victor was in a state these past weeks," she said, sorting a bundle of letters. "Came to the post office asking if any strange mail had arrived. Said he'd lost something vital." Miss Marple's interest sharpened, recalling the mill wheel sealed envelope on Beatrice's letter. "Did he mention a well?" she asked, her tone gentle. Lucy shook her head, but added, "He was jumpy, kept looking over his shoulder like someone was watching." The image of Victor, anxious in his own village, suggested a threat beyond the curse, and Miss Marple filed it away, thinking of a St. Mary Mead shopkeeper whose fear had foreshadowed foul play. Back at the manor, Miss Marple sought Beatrice's permission to explore Victor's office again, hoping to uncover more about the will. The room, overlooking the mill, was cluttered with ledgers, blueprints for modernization, and a photograph of Victor with a young woman, dated 1910. The woman's sharp features bore a striking resemblance to Margaret Holly, the governess, though Margaret was far too young to be her. Miss Marple's lips pursed, the photograph a clue to a hidden connection. A hidden ledger tucked behind a shelf listed debts Victor owed to Margaret, small sums, but regular, suggesting a financial tie. Curious, she murmured, recalling. A St. Mary Mead ledger that had revealed a secret partnership turned sour. She found Dr. Simon Fowler in the manor's conservatory, tending to a wilting fern, his spectacles fogged with concentration. "Dr. Fowler," she said, settling nearby, "you mentioned Victor's anxiety. Was it tied to the mill or the will?" Fowler's hands paused, his voice measured. "He was sleepless, troubled by business. I prescribed a tonic, but he spoke of a document, said it was causing strife. Pressed about the curse, he scoffed. Village nonsense, but Victor was superstitious, kept a charm, a mill wheel pendant in his pocket. The pendant, Miss Marple noted, matched the cufflink and seal, tying Victor to the mill's symbolism. Fowler's reticence like iced tea. Mary Mead doctor shielding a patient's secret, suggested he knew more. Gerald Langley, encountered in the drawing room, was less guarded but no less tense. His brooding features darkened as he spoke of Victor. He was reckless, Gerald said, his fingers drumming on a chair. Modernizing the mill would have bankrupted us, turned Hollowbrook into a factory town. I told him to sell, but he wouldn't listen. Miss Marple asked about the will, watching his reaction. It named me heir, he said, his voice low. Victor showed it to me once, but then it vanished. He was cagey, said changes were coming. His frustration, tinged with desperation, echoed a St. Mary Mead heir whose inheritance had been threatened by a lost deed. Margaret Hall, passing. Through with young Emily, paused at Miss Marple's request. Miss Halley, you seem fond of the mill's history, Miss Marple said, noting her blue silk shawl. Did Victor share anything about its troubles? Margaret's eyes flicked to the photograph on the mantel, her fingers tightening on her. Locket. He loved the mill, but it weighed on him, she said, her voice clipped. The curse was just talk, but he believed it, kept old papers locked away. Her evasiveness, coupled with the ledger's debts, suggested a deeper stake, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead governess whose calm had hidden a personal vendetta. As the day waned, Miss Marple sat by the manor's fire, her knitting a pretext for reflection. The village's whispers, the ledger, the photograph, Gerald's anger, they were threads in a tapestry of motive. The curse, she suspected, was a convenient mask for murder, with the will at its heart. She thought of the St. Mary Mead scandal, where a ghost story had cloaked a theft, its truth revealed by a single clue. The mill keeps its secrets, she murmured, her needles clicking softly, but not for long. Hollowbrook's peace was fractured, but Miss Marple was ready to mend it, one whisper at a time. Chapter 4. The Midnight Watch. The morning mist clung to Hollowbrook, shrouding the mill's ancient stones and muffling the river's murmur as the village grappled with Victor Crane's death. Miss Jane Marple, her navy shawl draped over her shoulders, stood by the manor's window, her knitting needles idle as she pondered the locked-room murder. The fallen beam, its sawed supports, the cryptic note, the mill's curse claims its due and Victor's watch, stopped at midnight, pointed to a deliberate act cloaked in superstition. The missing will, tied to Gerald Langley's inheritance, loomed as a motive, but the household's guarded alibis and the village's whispers of a curse demanded closer scrutiny. Today, Miss Marple resolved to unravel the scene's contradictions. Sensing the truth lay in the mill's silent corners, Inspector Clara Reed convened a meeting at the manor's drawing room, her clipboard brimming with notes as she shared the coroner's findings. The guests, Gerald, Margaret Haw, Dr. Simon Fowler, and Beatrice Langley sat in tense silence, their faces reflecting grief, suspicion, or restraint. Reed's voice was crisp as she outlined the facts. Victor died at midnight, the beams. Sabotage confirmed by fresh saw marks, and no fingerprints were found on the note or the grindstone. This wasn't an accident, she said, her auburn hair catching the firelight. Someone cut that beam, locked the door, and left that note to mislead us. Miss Marple, seated unobtrusively with her knitting, noted the guests' reactions. Gerald's clenched fists, Margaret's fleeting glance at her locket, Fowler's averted eyes, and Beatrice's trembling hands. Reed invited Miss Marple to inspect the grinding room again, valuing her insight despite her civilian status. The mill's interior was cold, its air thick with the scent of dust and oil, the great wheels creak a mournful underscore. Miss Marple circled the crime scene, her magnifying glass revealing a loose floorboard near the fallen beam, its edge scuffed as if recently lifted. Kneeling with surprising agility, she pried it up, uncovering a scrap of blue silk caught in a splinter, its hue matching Margaret's shawl. "Curious," she murmured, tucking the scrap into her handkerchief, recalling a St. Mary Mead case where a torn ribbon had betrayed a thief's presence. The floorboard's hiding place suggested someone had lingered, perhaps to sabotage the beam, and the silk pointed to Margaret, or a deliberate plant. She examined the grindstone where the note had been found. The chalk smudge she'd noticed earlier was faint, but a closer look revealed a partial erasure, as if a mark or message had been hastily removed. The note's paper, torn from a common ledger, bore no distinguishing marks, but its ink matched. A bottle in Victor's office, suggesting it was written on site. The locked door, with its key in Victor's pocket, remained a puzzle, but Miss Marple tested the bolts, finding one slightly loose, as if tampered with to allow re-entry. "A clever illusion," she said to Reed, her tone neutral but her mind racing, thinking of a St. Mary Mead barn where a loose latch had facilitated a staged robbery. Reed summoned Tom Ellis, the mill's groundskeeper, a wiry man with calloused hands and a wary gaze. "Mr. Ellis," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle, "you work late hours. Did you see anyone near the mill at midnight?" Tom shifted, his cap twisted in his hands. "Saw a shadow mist by the river bank, moving quick. Couldn't make out who, too dark, and I was tending the sluice." His hesitation, coupled with a glance at the manor, suggested fear of implicating someone, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead gardener whose half-truths had shielded a culprit. Reed pressed him, but Tom insisted he'd returned home by 12:30. His wife confirming his alibi. Miss Marple sought Gerald Langley in the manor's library, where he pored over legal papers, his brooding features etched with strain. "Mr. Langley," she said, settling nearby, "you argued with Victor about the mill's future. Might you share more about the will?" Gerald's pen paused, his voice low. "Victor showed it to me months ago, named me heir to the mill. But he hinted at changes, a codicil, and then it vanished. I thought he was stalling to push his modernization plans." His frustration was palpable, but when asked about the midnight shadow, he claimed to be asleep, his alibi unverified. Miss Marple noted his fidgeting hands, reminiscent of a St. Mary Mead heir whose anxiety had masked deceit. Margaret Hall, encountered in the garden with young Emily, was more guarded. Her blue shawl, identical to the silk scrap, fluttered in the breeze as she supervised Emily's sketching. "Miss Halley," Miss Marple said, her tone disarming, "you're familiar with the mill." Did you notice anything odd that night? Margaret's fingers tightened on her locket, her voice calm but clipped. I was reading to Emily until 10, then retired. The Mill's curses nonsense Victor was just careless. Her dismissal of the curse felt rehearsed, and when Miss Marple mentioned the loose floorboard, Margaret's eyes flicked to the Mill, a fleeting betrayal of unease. Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead governess whose composure had hidden a personal stake. Dr. Fowler, found in his study reviewing patient files, was equally reticent. Dr. Fowler, Miss Marple began. Victor's watch stopped at midnight, suggesting a struggle or a deliberate act. Did he seem troubled that evening? Fowler adjusted his spectacles, his hands steady but his voice guarded. He was restless, yes, over business matters. I gave him a tonic at 9, but he was alone when I left. His reluctance to mention the will, despite earlier hints, suggested loyalty or fear. And Miss Marple thought of the St. Mary Mead physician who'd concealed a patient's distress to protect a family dog as the day closed. Miss Marple sat by the manor's fire, her knitting a pretext for reflection. The silk scrap, the loose bolt, Tom's shadow, Gerald's desperation, they were clues in a carefully staged murder, the curse a distraction. The will's absence, tied to Victor's codicil, hinted at a motive rooted in inheritance or betrayal. She recalled a St. Mary Mead accident, blamed on a storm but revealed as sabotage, its truth in a single overlooked detail. The Mill watches, she murmured, her needles clicking softly, and so do I. Tomorrow she would probe deeper, following the midnight shadow to its source. Chapter 5. Secrets in the Village. The sun climbed over Hollowbrook, its rays piercing the morning mist to gild the river's edge, where the Mill's ancient wheel turned with a mournful creak. Miss Jane Marple, her navy coat buttoned against. The spring chill set out from Langley Manor to explore the village, her parasol a gentle prop for eliciting confidences. Victor Crane's murder, his crushed body beneath the sabotage beam, the cryptic note invoking the Mill's curse, and the missing will had stirred the village into a frenzy of speculation. The blue silk scrap, the loose door bolt, and Tom Ellis's midnight shadow were clues pointing to a calculated act. And Miss Marple aimed to unearth the village's secrets, knowing that whispered tales often held the key to unraveling a mystery. First stop was St. Luke's Church, a Norman structure with a mossy graveyard and stained glass windows casting jeweled patterns on the stone floor. The vicar, Mr. Henry Walsh, was polishing brass candlesticks, his kindly face creased with concern over Victor's death. Miss Marple, a sad business, he said, setting aside his cloth. Victor was generous funded our bell tower's repair, but the Mill's curse has folk rattled. She smiled, settling on a pew, her knitting resumed as a pretext for conversation. Mr. Walsh, did Victor ever speak of family matters, perhaps a will? The vicar hesitated, then nodded. He mentioned a document, said it was causing strife. With Gerald, there were hints of an old promise tied to his first wife, Clara. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed, recalling a St. Mary Mead vicar whose vague hints had led to a hidden heir. Clara? She prompted, and Walsh sighed. She vanished. Years ago, left rumors of a child. Victor never spoke of it, but he seemed burdened. The vicar's words stirred Miss Marple's memory of the photograph in Victor's office, showing a woman resembling Margaret Hawley. She thanked Walsh, noting his unease, and strolled to the village square, where the market buzzed with vendors hawking fresh eggs, woven baskets, and jars of honey. The post office, a squat building with a red door, was her next destination. Miss Lucy Grant, the postmistress, greeted her behind the counter, her pince-nez glinting as she sorted letters. "Miss Marple, you're the talk of Hollowbrook," Lucy said, her voice warm but curious. "Solving Victor's murder, are you?" Miss Marple chuckled, her tone disarming. "Merely visiting, Miss Grant, but I'm intrigued by the Mill." Did Victor receive any unusual posts recently? Lucy's eyes lit up, eager to share. Funny you ask. A stranger came last week, mailed a letter to Victor. Tall fellow, gray beard, kept his scarf high, like he didn't want to be recognized. The envelope had a mill wheel seal, same as the Langleys use. Miss Marple's interest sharpened, the seal matching Beatrice's letter and Victor's cufflink. Did he give a name? She asked, her needles pausing. Lucy shook her head. Paid in cash, left quick. Asked if the mill was still Victor's, sounded like he knew him. The stranger's inquiry suggested a personal stake, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead postman whose delivery had uncovered a long-lost relative's claim dot at the Hollowbrook Inn. Miss Marple joined Mrs. Edith Porter for tea, the inn's cozy parlor filled with the scent of baking bread. Edith, ever the gossip, leaned close, her apron dusted with flour. That stranger stayed here, you know, she whispered. Called himself James Miller, but I'd wager it's a false name. Asked about Victor, the mill, even Clara Langley. Said he had business with the family. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind on the mill wheel seal. Clara, you say? She prompted, and Edith nodded. Victor's first wife ran off 20 years ago. Some say she had a child, hidden away. Victor never spoke of it, but Margaret Hale's been asking about Clara's old cottage, odd for a governess. The connection to Margaret deepened, and Miss Marple thought of a St. Mary Mead scandal where a missing parent had sparked a feud back at the manor. Miss Marple found Beatrice in the morning room, arranging daffodils with a distracted air. Beatrice. Dear, she said, settling nearby, the village speaks of Clara, Victor's first wife. What became of her? Beatrice's hand stilled, her voice low. She left Victor, or so he said. There were rumors of a daughter, but he denied it. Said Clara was troubled, ran to London. He remarried, but the scandal lingered. Her reluctance to elaborate suggested shame or secrecy, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead widow whose silence had hidden the family's disgrace. And Margaret? Miss Marple asked, noting Beatrice's flinch. She's a fine governess, but Victor was kind to her, paid her debts. I thought it charity. The ledger's record of those debts took on new weight, hinting at a bond beyond. Employment. Miss Marple sought Margaret in the library, where she was reading to young Emily, her blue silk shawl draped over a chair. Miss Hawley, Miss Marple said, her tone gentle, your locket is lovely. A family piece? Margaret's fingers flew to the locket, her voice tight. Yes, my mother's. She passed when I was young. The photograph's resemblance to the locket's portrait, glimpsed briefly, was striking, and Miss Marple. Press further. You've studied the mill's history. Did Victor share tales of Clara? Margaret's eyes flickered. He mentioned her once, said she loved the mill. It's just history, nothing more. Her evasiveness, coupled with Edith's comment about Clara's cottage, suggested Margaret was more than a bystander, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead teacher whose heirloom had revealed her true lineage. As the afternoon faded, Miss Marple sat by the manor's fire, her knitting a pretext for reflection. The stranger's letter, Clara's disappearance, Margaret's locket, Beatrice's reticence, they were threads in a tapestry of secrets, with the will at its heart. The mill's curse, she suspected, was a fiction exploited by a killer masking, a motive tied to inheritance or revenge. She thought of a St. Mary Mead mystery where a stranger's arrival had unearthed a buried claim, its truth in a single letter. The village knows more than it says, she murmured, her needles clicking. Softly, and so does the manor. Tomorrow, she would follow the mill wheel seal's trail, certain it led to the killer's shadow. Chapter 6. The Will's Trail. The midday sun filtered through the willows of Hollowbrook, casting dappled shadows on the river's edge, where the mill's ancient wheel turned with a relentless creak. Miss Jane Marple, her knitting tucked into. Her reticule stood in the manor's library, her sharp blue eyes fixed on a portrait of a stern Langley ancestor, its frame gathering dust. Victor Crane's murder, his body crushed beneath a sabotage beam, the cryptic note invoking the Mills. Curse and the missing will had woven a web of suspicion around the household. The blue silk scrap, the stranger's mill-wheel sealed letter, and Margaret Hale's locket, hinting at a tie to Victor's first wife, Clara, were clues pointing to a motive rooted in inheritance. Today, Miss Marple resolved to trace the will's path, sensing its absence was the key to the killer's intent. She began in Victor's office above the mill's grinding room, where Inspector Clara Reed had granted her access, valuing her knack for spotting what others missed. The office was a cluttered sanctuary of ledgers, blueprints for the mill's modernization, and a photograph of Victor with a woman resembling Margaret, dated 1910. Miss Marple's fingers traced the desk, its surface scarred with ink stains and a faint scratch near a locked drawer, already forced open by Reed. The drawer held routine papers, but a locked safe beneath the desk, overlooked in the initial search, caught her eye. Its dial was cold. To the touch, its combination a mystery, but a coded note tucked in a ledger offered a clue. The note, scrawled in Victor's hand, read, "River's turn, 3 and 5, holds the truth." Miss Marple's lips pursed, recognizing a cipher, and she recalled a St. Mary Mead merchant whose coded ledger had hidden a smuggling scheme. Seated at the desk, she puzzled over the note, her knitting resumed as a pretext for focus. The phrase "river's turn" suggested the mill wheel, which completed 3 rotations every 5 minutes, a rhythm she timed during her mill visit. Testing the safe's dial with the sequence 3 to 5, she heard a click, and the door swung open, revealing a draft will, its pages brittle but legible. Dated a year prior, it named Gerald Langley heir to the mill, but a codicil, added recently, promised a share to an unnamed beneficiary to be revealed upon Victor's death. The document's secrecy suggested a sensitive legacy, and Miss Marple thought of a St. Mary Mead, whose hidden clause had sparked a family feud. She summoned Gerald to the office, finding him in the manor's hall, his brooding features etched with strain. "Mr. Langley," she said, her tone gentle but probing, "this draft will names you heir, but a codicil hints at another. Did Victor share its terms?" Gerald's eyes widened, his hands fidgeting. "He showed me the will once, said I'd inherit the mill, but he was vague about changes, kept muttering about obligations. I searched his office last month, found nothing." His admission of searching, coupled with his frustration, painted him as desperate, and Miss Marple noted his flushed cheeks, reminiscent of a St. Mary Mead heir whose greed had led to theft. "And the night of the murder?" she asked. Gerald insisted he was asleep, but his glance at the safe betrayed unease. Miss Marple sought Dr. Simon Fowler in the conservatory, where he was pruning roses, his spectacles fogged with effort. "Dr. Fowler," she began, Victor's anxiety over the will. "Did he mention a codicil?" Fowler's shears paused, his voice measured. "He was troubled, yes, said he owed someone from his past. I urged him to rest, but he was stubborn." His reluctance to name the beneficiary echoed his earlier reticence about Clara, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead physician who'd shielded a patient's secret to avoid scandal. "Might it involve Clara?" she pressed, watching his reaction. Fowler's hands trembled, but he shook his head. "Clara's gone, long dead, I'd wager. Victor never said more." Margaret Hale, found in the library with young Emily, was less forthcoming. Her blue silk shawl, matching the mill's scrap, hung over a chair as she read aloud, her voice steady but her eyes wary. "Miss Hale," Miss Marple said, settling nearby, "you knew Victor well. Did he speak of a will or his plans for the mill?" Margaret's fingers tightened on her locket, its portrait a silent clue to her past. "He left the mill, wanted to modernize it," she said, her tone clipped. He mentioned a will once, said it'd secure the future, but nothing specific. Her knowledge of the mill's layout, gleaned from tutoring Gerald, suggested deeper involvement, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead governess whose familiarity with the house had aided a burglary. Miss Marple visited the Hollowbrook Inn, where Mrs. Edith Porter was sweeping the parlor, her gossip as plentiful as her scones. "Edith, dear," Miss Marple said, sipping tea, "you mentioned a secret chamber in the mill, from old Langley Tailies. Might it hold papers?" Edith's eyes gleamed, eager to share. The mill's got hidden nooks. Old Josiah Langley, the cursed miller, hid his gold in a chamber under the gears, or so they say. Victor was poking about there, said he was checking the structure. The chamber's legend, tied to the mill's past, offered a hiding place for the will, and Miss Marple thought of a St. Mary Mead attic where a lost deed had been stashed out as evening fell. Miss Marple sat by the manor's fire, her knitting a companion to her thoughts. The draft will, Gerald's search, Margaret's locket, the chamber's lore, they were threads in a tapestry of motive, with Clara's shadow looming large. The stranger's letter, sealed with the mill wheel, suggested an outsider's stake, perhaps tied to the codicil. She recalled a St. Mary Mead case where a hidden document had revealed a secret heir, its discovery shattering a family. "The will's trail," she murmured, her needles clicking softly, "leads to the mills." Heart. Tomorrow she would seek the chamber, certain its secrets would light the path to Victor's killer. Chapter 7. The Hidden Chamber. The afternoon light waned over Hollowbrook, casting long shadows across the river's surface as the mill's ancient wheel turned with its ceaseless, mournful creak. Miss Jane Marple, her sensible shoes damp from the riverbank's dew, stood in the grinding room of Hollowbrook Mill, her sharp blue eyes scanning the stone walls for signs of the secret chamber hinted at by Mrs. Edith Porter. Victor Crane's murder, his skull crushed by a sabotage beam, the cryptic note invoking the mill's curse, and the missing will had deepened the village's unease. The draft will's codicil, the blue silk scrap tied to Margaret Hawley, and the stranger's mill wheel sealed letter pointed to a motive rooted in a hidden legacy, possibly Clara Langley's child. Today, Miss Marple resolved to find the chamber, certain it held the key to the locked room mystery and the killer's method. With Inspector Clara Reed's permission, Miss Marple explored the mill, her parasol tapping the floorboards as she moved with quiet purpose. The grinding room, still cordoned off, was a cavernous space of dust and shadow, its gears silent save for the wheel's distant rhythm. The fallen beam, its sawed supports now catalogued by Reed's team, lay propped against a wall, and the grindstone bore the faint chalk smudge she'd noted earlier. Miss Marple's fingers traced the walls, her knuckles rapping softly until a hollow echo sounded behind a rusted iron panel, half hidden by sacks of flour. She pressed its edges, finding a concealed latch, and with a gentle tug, the panel slid open, revealing a narrow chamber, its stone walls damp and cloaked in cobwebs. A musty scent of old paper and oil greeted her, and she stepped inside, her handkerchief pressed to her nose, recalling a St. Mary Mead cellar where a hidden nook had concealed stolen jewels. The chamber was small, barely wide enough for two, with a low ceiling and a single shelf carved into the stone. On it sat a tin box, its lid etched with a mill wheel, matching Victor's cufflink and the stranger's letter seal. Miss Marple opened it carefully, revealing a bundle of letters tied with faded ribbon and a sealed envelope marked Final Will. Of Victor Crane. The letters, penned in a woman's hand, were signed Clara Langley and addressed to Victor, confessing to a daughter, Margaret, born in secret to protect the family's name. Clara wrote of leaving Hollowbrook, entrusting the child to a trusted friend, and begging Victor to provide for her. The will, dated 6 months prior, named Gerald Langley heir to the mill but granted Margaret Hawley an equal share, acknowledging Her as Clara's daughter. Miss Marple's lips pursed, the documents confirming Margaret's identity and a motive for murder, echoing a St. Mary Mead case where a secret heir had sparked betrayal. She summoned Reed, who examined the chamber. With a mix of awe and frustration. "Blasted old mills," she muttered, crawling inside, her torch illuminating the cramped space. The chamber's entrance, accessible from the grinding room, explained the locked room puzzle. The killer had entered, killed Victor, and exited, locking the door from inside with the key left in his pocket. Reed dusted the box for prints, finding only smudges, but Miss Marple pointed to a fresh scuff on the floor, suggesting recent use, and a second scrap of blue silk caught in the panels. Hinge matching Margaret's shawl. "Someone knew this chamber," Miss Marple said, her tone neutral but her mind racing, thinking of a St. Mary Mead attic where a hidden door had revealed a thief's path. Miss Marple caught Margaret Hawley outside the mill, her shawl fluttering. As she sketched the wheel for young Emily, "Miss Hawley," Miss Marple began, her voice gentle, "we found a chamber in the mill, with letters about Clara. Your locket, does it hold her portrait?" Margaret's hand flew to the locket, her face paling. I was researching the mill's history for Emily's lessons," she stammered. "The locket's my mother's, that's all." Her denial was swift, but her eyes lingered on the mill, and Miss Marple noted the silk scrap's implication, recalling a St. Mary Mead governess whose heirloom had betrayed her true identity. "You knew of Clara's daughter, didn't you?" Miss Marple pressed, watching her flinch. Margaret fled, claiming Emily needed her, but her panic was telling. Gerald Langley, found in the manor's library, was more forthcoming but no less troubled. "Mr. Langley," Miss Marple said, settling nearby, "the will names you and Margaret co-heirs." Did Victor hint at her parentage? Gerald's jaw tightened, his voice bitter. "He mentioned Clara's mistake once, said he was making amends. I thought it was charity, not a daughter. The mill's mine by right." His anger at the shared inheritance was palpable, and when Miss Marple mentioned the chamber, he admitted exploring the mill as a boy but claimed ignorance of its secrets. His flushed cheeks, however, suggested knowledge, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead heir whose resentment had fueled deceit. Dr. Simon Fowler, encountered in his study, was guarded as ever. "Dr. Fowler," Miss Marple said, "the chamber held Clara's letters confirming Margaret's birth. Did Victor confide in you?" Fowler's spectacles slipped, his hands trembling. "He spoke of a debt to Clara, yes, but I thought it financial. I urged him to settle it quietly." His reluctance to admit Margaret's identity echoed his earlier silence, and Miss Marple thought of a St. Mary Mead doctor who'd concealed a patient's past to avoid scandal. "And the night of the murder?" she asked. Fowler insisted he was home, but his nervous cough betrayed unease. As dust settled, Miss Marple sat by the manor's fire, her knitting a companion to her thoughts. The chamber's contents, Clara's letters, the will, the silk scraps pointed to Margaret's stake and Gerald's resentment, with the stranger's letter adding an external threat. The locked room, solved by the chamber's access, suggested a killer familiar with the mill's secrets. She recalled a St. Mary Mead murder where a hidden passage had facilitated a crime, its truth in a single clue. "The mill's heart," she murmured, her needles clicking softly, "beats with secrets." Tomorrow she would test the alibis against the chamber's evidence, certain the killer's shadow was near. Chapter 8. A crack in the facade. Morning sun struggled through a veil of clouds over Hollowbrook, casting a muted glow on the mill's weathered stones as the village buzzed with unease. Miss Jane Marple, her navy shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, sat in the manor's drawing room, her knitting needles clicking softly as she reflected on Victor Crane's murder. The hidden chamber's revelations, Clara Langley's letters confirming Margaret Hawley as her daughter, the will naming Margaret and Gerald Langley co-heirs, and the blue silk scraps tying Margaret to the scene had shattered the illusion of the locked room mystery. The stranger's mill wheel-sealed letter and the sabotage beam pointed to a calculated act, and Miss Marple resolved to test the household's alibis. Sensing a crack in their carefully maintained facades would reveal the killer's hand. Inspector Clara Reed, her clipboard brimming with notes, joined Miss Marple to review the evidence, her brisk demeanor softened by a grudging respect. "That chamber changes everything," Reed said, her auburn hair pinned tightly. "The killer used it to enter, kill Victor, and lock the door, leaving the curse note as a diversion." Miss Marple nodded, her sharp blue eyes scanning the room, where the guests, Gerald, Margaret, Dr. Simon Fowler, and Beatrice Langley gathered for questioning. Gerald's brooding intensity, Margaret's guarded calm, Fowler's reticence, and Beatrice's nervous fidgeting were threads in a tapestry of deceit, and Miss Marple aimed to tug at their loose ends, recalling his St. Mary Mead case where a single lie had unraveled a thief's plan. She began with Gerald, whose alibi he claimed to be asleep at midnight had yet to be verified. "Mr. Langley," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing, "you were familiar with the mill's layout. Might you have visited it that night?" Gerald's jaw tightened, his hands clenching a fountain pen. "I was in my room drafting letters," he insisted, his voice low. "I hadn't been to the mill since my argument with Victor." To test his claim, Miss Marple suggested retracing his movements from the manor to the mill, a walk she'd timed at 10 minutes. As they descended the manor's oak staircase, a creaky step groaned under Gerald's weight, its sound sharp in the quiet hall. "Curious," she murmured, noting the noise matched a faint creak she'd heard the night of the murder while fetching her shawl. "This stir betrays movement, Mr. Langley. Were you out at midnight?" Gerald's face flushed, and he admitted checking the mill at 11, worried about Victor's plans, but claimed he returned by 11:30. His partial confession, coupled with the creak, placed him near the scene, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead heir whose nocturnal wanderings had betrayed his guilt. Margaret Hall was next, found in the garden sketching the mill's wheel with young Emily, her blue silk shawl, identical to the chamber's scraps, hung loosely as she worked, her eyes wary. "Miss Hollow," Miss Marple said, settling on a bench. "The chamber held Clara's letters, naming you her daughter. Did you search for the will?" Margaret's hand flew to her locket, her voice steady but strained. "I explored the mill. For Emily's history lessons, nothing more. The shawl must have caught when I was there last week." Her denial was swift, but the second silk scrap, fresh in the chamber's hinge, suggested recent entry, and Miss Marple pressed further. "And the night of Victor's death?" Margaret insisted she was reading to Emily until 10, then asleep, but her fingers twisted a curl, a nervous tick echoing a St. Mary Mead governess who'd concealed her role in a theft Dr. Fowler encountered. In his study was organizing his medical bag, a vial of sedative catching Miss Marple's eye. "Dr. Fowler," she began, Victor's calm demeanor that night, might he have been sedated? Fowler's spectacles slipped, his hands trembling. "I gave him a tonic at 9, mild enough, for insomnia," he said, his voice guarded. "The coroner found no trace of anything stronger." His defensiveness, coupled with the sedative's presence, raised questions about Victor's state, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead doctor whose prescriptions had masked the patient's vulnerability. "Did you know of Margaret's parentage?" she asked, watching his reaction. Fowler shook his head, but his cough betrayed unease, suggesting he'd guarded Victor's secrets. Miss Marple visited the Hollowbrook Inn to pursue the stranger. James Miller, whose mill-wheel-sealed letter had unsettled Victor, Mrs. Edith Porter, sweeping the parlor, confirmed his stay. "Called himself Miller, but his accent was local," Edith said, her eyes gleaming. "Asked about Clara, Victor, the mill's ownership. left the day before the murder, paid in cash. The alias tied to the millwheel seal suggested a personal vendetta, and Miss Marple hypothesized Miller was Clara's kin, perhaps seeking Margaret's inheritance. She recalled a St. Mary Mead stranger whose false name had hidden a family claim, and Edith's tale strengthened the theory. Back at the manor, Miss Marple shared her findings with Reed, who was examining the chamber's scuff marks. Gerald's creaky stair, Margaret's silk, Fowler's sedative, they're all near the truth, Miss Marple said, her knitting resumed by the fire. Reed nodded, dispatching a constable to trace Miller's whereabouts. The chamber's access, the will's codicil, and the stranger's inquiries pointed to a conspiracy, with the curse as a convenient mask. Miss Marple observed the guests at luncheon, their tensions flaring. Gerald's sharp retort to Margaret's comment about the mill, Fowler's silence, Beatrice's nervous glance at the locked safe. She thought of a St. Mary Mead murder, where a single clue, a torn fabric, had cracked a killer's alibi dot as the day closed. Miss Marple sat by the manor's window, her needles clicking softly, her thoughts on the facades crumbling. Gerald's midnight visit, Margaret's chamber knowledge, Fowler's reticence, and Miller's shadow were pieces of a puzzle with the will's promise at its core. She recalled a St. Mary Mead case where a staged accident had unraveled through a servant's testimony. The mill's secrets, she murmured, her eyes on the darkening river, are breaking free. Tomorrow, she would confront the stranger's motive, certain it would lead her to the killer's doorstep. Chapter 9. The stranger's motive. The morning in Hollowbrook dawned with a restless energy. The river sparkled, dulled by a gathering mist that clung to the mill's ancient stones. Miss Jane Marple, her navy coat buttoned against the damp, sat in the manor's morning room. Her knitting needles paused as she sifted through the clues surrounding Victor Crane's murder. The hidden chamber's revelations, Clara Langley's letters confirming Margaret Hawley as her daughter, the will naming Margaret and Gerald Langley co-heirs, had exposed a motive tied to inheritance. The blue silk scraps, Gerald's creaky stair, and Dr. Fowler's sedative pointed to a conspiracy within the household. But the stranger, James Miller, and his mill-wheel-sealed letter suggested an external force. Today, Miss Marple aimed to unravel Miller's role. Certain his motive would illuminate the killer's shadow, Miss Marple began at the Hollowbrook Inn, where Mrs. Edith Porter was polishing glasses, her gossip as sharp as her cloth. "Edith, dear," Miss Marple said, settling with a cup of tea. "This James Miller, did he leave any trace, perhaps a forwarding address?" Edith's eyes gleamed, eager to share. "Not a proper address, but he mentioned catching a train. T.O. Ashford. Said he had family business, kept asking about Clara Langley and the mill's deeds. Looked like a man with a grudge." Miss Marple nodded, her thoughts on the mill-wheel seal, identical to Victor's cufflink and Beatrice's letter. Miller's inquiries about Clara suggested a personal stake, and she recalled a St. Mary Mead stranger whose questions about a family estate had masked a claim to inheritance. She sought Inspector Clara Reed at the mill, where the grinding room's cordon was now a village curiosity. Reed, her clipboard in hand, shared a telegram from Ashford's constabulary. Miller had been spotted at a boarding house, using the same alias. "He's slippery," Reed said, her auburn hair catching the light. "No record under Miller. But we're checking Clara's kin." Miss Marple suggested Miller might be Clara's brother, seeking Margaret's share of the will, and Reed agreed to widen the search. The chamber's scuff marks, Reed noted, bore traces of boot polish, hinting at a man's presence, and Miss Marple filed this away, thinking of a St. Mary Mead case where a footprint had betrayed an outsider's role dotted the manor. Miss Marple found Dr. Simon Fowler in his study, his medical bag open, a ledger of patient visits beside him. "Dr. Fowler," she began, her tone gentle, "you knew Clara Langley. Might her family, perhaps a brother, have contacted Victor?" Fowler's spectacles slipped, his hands pausing over a vial. Clara was troubled, left Hollowbrook years ago, he said, his voice measured. Victor mentioned a brother once, said he was bitter, blamed the Langleys for Clara's ruin. I thought he was dead. His admission, reluctant but revealing, confirmed Miller's likely identity, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead physician who'd hidden a family scandal to protect a patient. Did Victor fear this brother? She pressed. Fowler coughed, avoiding her gaze. He was cautious, kept his papers locked. Miss Marple sought Margaret Holly in the library, where she was shelving books, her blue silk shawl draped over a chair. Miss Holly, Miss Marple said, settling nearby. A stranger, possibly Clara's brother, mailed Victor a letter. Have you met him? Margaret's hand flew to her locket, her face paling. Someone approached me last month at the market, asking about my mother, she admitted, her voice trembling. He called himself James, said he was family, urged me to claim my rights. I told him to leave me alone. Her confession placed Miller in Hollowbrook, pressuring Margaret, and Miss Marple noted her flushed cheeks, reminiscent of a St. Mary Mead orphan whose past had resurfaced with a vengeance. Did he mention the will? Miss Marple asked. Margaret shook her head, but her eyes darted to the mill, suggesting fear. Gerald Langley, encountered in the drawing room, was less forthcoming, his brooding features etched with frustration. Mr. Langley, Miss Marple said. The stranger, James Miller, asked about the mill's ownership. Might he have threatened Victor? Gerald's pen snapped, ink staining his fingers. Victor never said, but he was jumpy, kept checking. The locks. If Clara's brother was sniffing around, he was after the mill, not me. His defensiveness, coupled with his financial troubles noted in Victor's ledger, suggested desperation, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead heir whose debts had driven him to deceit. And your argument with Victor? She pressed. Gerald admitted it was about selling the mill, but claimed no knowledge of Miller's letter. Miss Marple visited the post office, where Miss Lucy Grant was sorting mail, her pince-nez glinting. Miss Grant, Miss Marple said, the stranger's letter to Victor, did it seem urgent? Lucy nodded, her memory sharp. Thick envelope, sealed tight, posted express. He paid extra to ensure delivery, said it was vital Victor read it. The letter's urgency suggested a demand, perhaps tied to the will's codicil, and Miss Marple thought of a St. Mary Mead letter that had sparked a family crisis. Lucy added that Miller had lingered, watching the mill from the square, his scarf hiding his face, a detail that painted him as calculating Dot at the manor. Miss Marple shared her findings with Reed, who was reviewing the will's terms. Miller's likely Clara's brother, pushing Margaret to claim her share. Miss Marple said, her knitting resumed by the fire. His letter may have pressured Victor, stirring the household. Reed agreed, noting Gerald's debts made him vulnerable to such a threat. The chamber's boot polish, Margaret's meeting with Miller, and Fowler's silence pointed to a conspiracy, with the curse as a mask. Miss Marple observed the guests at dinner, their tensions flaring, Gerald's sharp retort to Fowler's comment, Margaret's nervous glance at her locket, Beatrice's strained silence. She recalled a St. Mary Mead murder where an outsider's arrival had catalyzed a crime dot as night fell. Miss Marple sat by her window, her needles clicking softly, her thoughts on Miller's motive. His letter, Margaret's heritage, Gerald's desperation, they were threads in a tapestry of greed and revenge, with the will at its heart. She thought of a St. Mary Mead case where a stranger's claim had unraveled a killer's plan. The stranger's shadow, she murmured, her eyes on the mill's silhouette, cast a long net. Tomorrow she would confront the household, certain Miller's role would crack the case wide open. Chapter 10. The truth unlocked. The late morning sun pierced the mist over Hollowbrook, bathing the mill's ancient stones in a fleeting warmth as the village held its breath. Miss Jane Marple, her navy shawl draped neatly, stood in the Manor's drawing room, her knitting needles idle as she prepared to confront the household about Victor Crane's murder. The hidden chamber's secrets, Clara Langley's letters naming Margaret Hall her daughter, the will granting Margaret and Gerald. Langley co-airship had unraveled the locked room mystery. The blue silk scraps, Gerald's creaky stare, Dr. Fowler's reticence, and James Miller's mill wheel-sealed letter pointed to a motive steeped in greed and family secrets. Today, Miss Marple, with Inspector Clara Reed's support, aimed to expose the killer, certain the truth would emerge from the cracks in their alibis. Reed gathered the household Gerald, Margaret, Dr. Fowler, and Beatrice Langley in the drawing room, the fire crackling as a counterpoint to the tension. The will, now locked in Reed's case, sat on a table, its pages a silent witness to the motive. Reed's voice was crisp as she addressed them. Victor Crane was murdered, the beam sabotaged, the chamber used to stage a locked room. We know Margaret's parentage and the will's terms. Someone here acted to secure the mill. The guests' faces were a study in unease. Gerald's jaw clenched. Margaret's hand clutched her locket. Fowler's spectacles fogged, and Beatrice's eyes darted nervously. Miss Marple, seated unobtrusively, watched them, her serene demeanor masking the precision of her intent, recalling a St. Mary Mead confrontation where a single flinch had betrayed a thief. Miss Marple began, her voice gentle but commanding. The chamber solved the locked room, she said, holding up a blue silk scrap. Margaret, your shawl was found there, suggesting you search for the will. Margaret's face paled, her voice trembling. I explored the mill for Emily's lessons. Weeks ago, I didn't kill Victor. Her denial was fervent, but Miss Marple pressed on, turning to Gerald. Mr. Langley, the creaky stair places you near the mill at midnight, despite your alibi. Why were you there? Gerald's hands shook, his voice bitter. I checked on Victor, yes, worried he'd sell the mill, but I left him alive. His partial confession, strained but plausible, echoed a St. Mary Mead heir's half-truths under pressure. She addressed Dr. Fowler, noting his guarded posture. Dr. Fowler, you knew of Clara's daughter and Victor's debt to her. Did you withhold this to protect him? Fowler's cough was sharp, his spectacles slipping. I suspected Margaret was Clara's child, but Victor swore me to secrecy. I had no part in his death. His loyalty, tinged with guilt, mirrored a St. Mary Mead doctor's silence in a scandal. Miss Marple then revealed James Miller's role. Clara's brother, seeking Margaret's share, mailed a letter pressuring Victor. Margaret, you met him, didn't you? Margaret nodded, tears welling. He urged me to claim the will, said it was my right. I refused. He frightened me. Miss Marple wove the clues together, her tone steady. The will's codicil threatened Gerald's control of the mill, splitting it with Margaret. James Miller's letter, demanding her share, stirred the household. The chamber allowed the killer to enter, sabotage the beam, and lock the door, leading the curse note as a diversion. She paused, her eyes on Gerald. Mr. Langley, your debts, noted in Victor's ledger, made the mill sale urgent. You argued with Victor, knew the chamber from boyhood, and the creaky stair betrays your midnight visit. You cut the beam, didn't you, to secure your inheritance? Gerald's face crumpled, his voice a whisper. I couldn't lose the mill. Victor was going to sell, give half to her. He gestured at Margaret, his confession spilling out. I rigged the beam to fall, used the chamber to lock the door. The note was to blame the curse. The room fell silent, the fire's crackle deafening as Reed stepped forward, her handcuffs ready. Gerald Langley, you're under arrest for murder, she said, her voice firm. Gerald slumped, his defiance gone as a constable led him away. Margaret sobbed, clutching her locket, while Fowler's shoulders sagged, his silence no longer. needed. Beatrice, trembling, whispered, "Oh, Jane, how did it come to this?" Miss Marple patted her hand, her thoughts on a St. Mary meat merchant whose greed had led to betrayal. His confession as inevitable as Gerald's. Miss Marple clarified. Margaret's role for Reed and the stunned household. Margaret searched the chamber, hoping to find the will, but stopped short of violence. Her silk scraps were from earlier visits, her mode of curiosity, not murder. Miller's letter pressured Victor, not her, and Gerald acted alone, driven by debt and fear. Reed nodded, her clipboard noting the details, and Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead case where a family's greed had unraveled through a single clue, a torn fabric, much like the silk. Fowler admitted urging Victor to hide Margaret's parentage, fearing scandal, but his role was peripheral. His sedative unrelated to the crime. As the guests dispersed, Miss Marple lingered by the fire, her knitting resumed, her mind tracing the case's threads. Gerald's desperation, Margaret's heritage. Miller's shadow, they had converged in the mill's dark heart, the curse of fiction to mask human frailty. She thought of a St. Mary Mead murder where a staged accident had crumbled under scrutiny. Its truth in a servant's testimony. The mill's curse, she murmured, her needles clicking softly, was greed's own shadow. Tomorrow she would see Gerald's fate sealed, but for now, Hollowbrook's truth was unlocked, its secrets laid bare by the quiet persistence of an elderly spinster. Chapter 11. Justice and Reconciliation. The afternoon sun bathed Hollowbrook in a gentle glow, its rays softening the mill's stern silhouette as the village exhaled after the storm of Victor Crane's murder. Miss Jane Marple, her navy shawl draped over her shoulders, sat on a bench in the manor's rose garden, her knitting needles crafting a soft scarf as she observed the quiet resilience of the community. Gerald Langley's confession, his sabotage of the mill's beam to secure his inheritance, using the hidden chamber and a curse note to mask the crime, had brought justice, but left wounds in its wake. The will's revelation of Margaret Hawley. As Clara Langley's daughter, James Miller's pressure, and Dr. Fowler's silence had unraveled a web of secrets. Today, Miss Marple watched Hollowbrook mend, knowing that villages like hearts healed through truth and small acts of grace. News of Gerald's arrest spread swiftly, carried by the village's gossip mill, now tempered with relief. At the Hollowbrook Inn, Mrs. Edith Porter served tea to a bustling crowd, her tales of the mill's curse softened to a cautionary legend. Gerald Langley, undone by greed, she said, pouring Miss Marple a cup. But the mill's free of its shadow now. Miss Marple smiled, her needles clicking, noting the village's shift from fear to renewal, much like a St. Mary Mead scandal that had faded into a fireside story. Truth has a way of settling things, Mrs. Porter, she said, and Edith nodded, her gossip giving way to plans for the spring fair, a sign of healing. At Langley Manor, Margaret Hall grappled with her newfound identity, her blue silk shawl draped over a chair as she sat in the library, her locket open to Clara's portrait. Miss Marple joined her, her presence a quiet anchor. "Miss Hallway, you've a place here, as Clara's daughter," she said, her tone gentle. Margaret's eyes welled, her voice soft. "I wanted to know my mother, to claim what was hers, but not like this. Gerald's hate, I never meant for it." Miss Marple patted her hand, recalling a St. Mary Mead orphan whose heritage had brought both pain and purpose. "You're innocent of murder, dear. The mill was yours to shape now." Margaret nodded, resolving to stay, her tutoring to continue, but with a share of the mill's future, honoring Clara's memory. Dr. Simon Fowler, his spectacles polished, resumed his village rounds, his kindly demeanor restored. Miss Marple encountered him on the manor's drive, his medical bag slung over his shoulder. "Dr. Fowler," she said, "your silence about Clara protected Victor, but it's lifted now." Fowler sighed, his voice earnest. "I thought shielding The truth would spare pain, but it festered. I'll help Margaret make amends. His atonement, practical and sincere, echoed a St. Mary Mead doctor who'd rebuilt trust after a scandal. A fine start, Miss Marple said, her eyes twinkling. Knowing small acts could mend deep rifts, Beatrice Langley, shaken by Gerald's betrayal, found solace in planning the mill's future. She met Miss Marple in the drawing room, where a tea tray held scones and honey. "Jane, you've saved us," Beatrice said, her silver hair catching the firelight. "Gerald's actions broke my heart, but the mill will thrive, for Margaret and the village." She shared plans to preserve it as a community hub, with workshops and a museum, Victor's modernization balanced with tradition. Miss Marple approved, recalling a St. Mary Mead manor turned into a library, its legacy a gift to all. "Hollowbrook is strong, Beatrice," she said, her needles pausing, "and so are you." The village fair, held on the green, was a vibrant affair, with bunting. Strung between oaks and stalls offering jams, knitted mittens, and cider. Children laughed, their games a counterpoint to recent gloom, while the church choir sang under Mr. Henry Walsh's direction. The vicar approached Miss Marple, his face serene. "Your clarity healed us, Miss Marple," he said, gesturing to the crowd. "Victor's generosity lives on, and Margaret's place is secure." He revealed the bell tower's repair, funded by Victor, was complete, a symbol of renewal. Miss Marple smiled, thinking of a St. Mary Mead fair where a village had rallied after a theft, its spirit unbroken. Inspector Clara Reed visited the manor, her clipboard tucked away, her brisk manner softened. "Miss Marple, you've a gift," she said, sipping tea. "Gerald's trial is set, the evidence solid chamber scuffs, silk scraps, his confession. You saw the creaky stairs truth." Miss Marple waved a hand, her modesty genuine. "You tied the knots, Inspector." "I only straightened the threads." Reed chuckled, admitting she'd read of Miss Marple's St. Mary Mead cases. "You're a legend, whether you claim it or not," she said. And Miss Marple recalled a St. Mary Mead constable who dubbed her the village sleuth, a title she wore lightly. Miss Marple strolled the mill's riverbank where the wheel turned with quiet purpose, its curse now a tale for tourists. The will, honored per Victor's terms, ensured Margaret's share, with Beatrice overseeing its community role. Gerald's greed, like a St. Mary Mead merchant's betrayal, had been his undoing, but Hollowbrook's heart endured. She thought of Margaret, finding her place, and Fowler, atoning for silence, their paths forward a testament to resilience. "Human nature," she murmured, her shawl catching the breeze, "falls but rises again." As evening fell, Miss Marple packed her suitcase, her gray tweed case neat with her shawl and knitting. Beatrice joined her for a final tea, her gratitude palpable. "You've given us hope, Jane," she said, her voice warm. Miss Marple smiled, patting her hand. "You found it yourselves, dear. Villages mend, given time." The mill's shadow had lifted, and Hollowbrook was whole, its story one of loss and redemption. Miss Marple thought of St. Mary Mead, where every scandal left a lesson, and felt ready for home, her mind already turning to Cherry's gossip and the next puzzle awaiting her. Chapter 12. Return to St. Mary Mead. The morning of Miss Jane Marple's departure from Hollowbrook broke with a tender clarity, the river's sparkle mirroring the village's renewed spirit as the sun gilded the mill's ancient stones. Her gray tweed suitcase, packed with her navy shawl, knitting, and a jar of Hollowbrook honey from Beatrice Langley, stood by the manor's oak staircase, a quiet testament to her transformative visit. The resolution of Victor Crane's murder, Gerald, Langley's confession to sabotaging the mill's beam, the hidden chamber's role, and the will naming Margaret Holly Coher had lifted the curse's shadow, restoring peace to the hamlet. As Miss Marple sipped her final cup of tea in the drawing room, Her needles clicking softly, she reflected on the case, its lessons woven into her memory like the scarf in her lap, ready to carry home to St. Mary Mead. Beatrice joined her for breakfast, her silver hair catching the light, her face free of the strain that had marked their first meeting. The manor, now a hub of plans for the mill's future, hummed with purpose. "Jane, you've given us back our home," Beatrice sighed, pouring tea, her voice warm with gratitude. "The mill will be a place of learning, not loss." Miss Marple smiled, her spectacles glinting. "Nonsense, dear. You and Margaret have shaped that path. I merely tugged a few threads." Her modesty, as always, masked the precision of her insight, honed by years of unraveling St. Mary Mead's intrigues. Beatrice shared that Margaret was settling into her role, planning workshops with local artisans, and Miss Marple nodded, recalling a St. Mary Mead girl who'd turned a tarnished legacy into a community's pride. Miss Marple took a final stroll through the manor's rose garden, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel path. The mill loomed nearby, its wheel turning with quiet resolve, no longer a symbol of dread. She paused by the riverbank, where wildflowers nodded in the breeze, and thought of Gerald, awaiting trial, his greed a cautionary tale. Margaret's journey, embracing her heritage as Clara's daughter, and Dr. Fowler's atonement echoed the resilience she'd seen in St. Mary Mead, where scandals faded into lessons. "Human nature," she murmured, her shawl catching the wind, "weaves both knots and beauty." The village fair's bunting still fluttered on the green, a reminder of Hollowbrook's strength, and she smiled, picturing a St. Mary Mead fate where theft's resolution had sparked similar renewal. Inspector Clara Reed arrived to escort her to the station, her brisk manner softened by a rare smile. "Miss Marple, you're a marvel," she said, loading the suitcase into the police car. "That chamber, the creaky stair, you saw what I nearly missed." Miss Marple waved a hand, her knitting tucked into her reticule. "You sealed the case, Inspector. I only straightened the pattern." Reed chuckled, admitting she'd studied Miss Marple's past cases in police archives. "You're a quiet legend," she said, and Miss Marple thought of a St. Mary Mead constable who'd called her the village sleuth, a title she wore with quiet amusement. The drive to the station wound through lanes of blossoming hawthorn, the mill fading into the distance, its curse now a story for tourists. Hollowbrook Station was a charming platform, bordered by pots of geraniums and bustling with fairgoers. Returning home, Mrs. Edith Porter waved from the crowd, her gossip now a fond farewell, and Mr. Henry Walsh tipped his hat, his vicarage restored to peace. Miss Marple boarded the train, her ticket tucked into her reticule, and settled by a window, her notebook open to jot the case's final notes, the chamber's damp stones, Gerald's ink-stained fingers, Margaret's locket. Each detail was a thread mirroring St. Mary Mead's dramas, where a missing brooch or a whispered feud could unravel a deeper truth. She recalled a St. Mary Mead murder, solved by a gardener's testimony, its parallels to Hollowbrook's creaky stair, a reminder of human constancy. The train chugged through rolling hills, Hollowbrook's oaks giving way to familiar meadows, and Miss Marple's thoughts turned to home. Cherry, her lively maid, would be waiting with tea and tailies, perhaps of the new family at the vicarage, hinting at fresh intrigues. The mill's curse, a fiction born of greed, had been dispelled, its true lesson in the will's justice and Margaret's resolve. She thought of a St. Mary Mead heirloom, coveted until donated, its piece a communal gift. "Secrets," she murmured, her needles resuming in her lap. "Bloom and shadow, but truth finds light." The landscape softened the spire of St. Mary, Mead's church visible in the distance, a beacon of home. At the station, Cherry greeted her with a grin, her apron dusted with flour. "Miss Marple, you're back." The vicarage lost a silver tray, nothing grand, but tongues are wagging. Miss Marple chuckled, her eyes twinkling as she took her suitcase. One puzzle at a time, Cherry. First tea and perhaps a scone. Her cottage welcomed her with its lavender-bordered path and clematis-wreathed door, the fire already lit, settling by her window, the sunset painting the sky in hues of amber and rose. She resumed her knitting, the scarf a quiet companion. Hollowbrook's mystery was solved, its lessons of greed, redemption, and resilience etched in her mind. St. Mary Mead, with its own secrets, awaited her keen eye, and Miss Marple was ready as ever for the next thread to tug. Life, she murmured, her needles clicking softly, is a tapestry ever unfolding.